Hello everyone, it's Rafael Gutierrez, Dr. Karate, Rafael Gutierrez MD, and today I'm going to do a video addressing a couple questions, actually only two specifically, that were asked of me. Now I haven't done this in a while, mostly because of work-related stuff, doing some projects that I didn't want to be on computer too long, but I'm back and I'm hoping I can start doing these once a week again. I usually get more inspired by seeing questions, and so if you do have any questions, if you like this channel especially, and you do have any questions, please feel free to put them on comments and I will do what I can to answer them. Now, there is actually two questions, and for one of them I'm going to use my makiwara, so we're going to go over there. And it's pretty much when you punch, how do you make sure you hit with your knuckles rather than your fingers? And I'm going to show you something on the makiwara about that later. The other one was how to learn anatomy. And the truth is, learning anatomy can be extremely difficult. It actually is really rewarding because it does tend to hit everything. And so the best way I found to teach and learn anatomy for most people is to use what you already know. What I mean by that is this. If you play sports, there's going to be certain things you're going to do. For instance, let's say you're pitching. You may actually be dealing with grabbing something. And so you can actually start looking at, okay, well, how do my fingers curl in? And you can actually look at the bones in particular to see how the hand moves to grab. And so you can then end up talking about, well, you have flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and same thing, flexion. You have the flexion, extension, abduction, adduction. And there's a lot of little different things you can do to learn how, for instance, to grab using your hands. And from there you can go into your forearm and see how your forearm moves around. And you can deal with the bones directly that you are actually using in whatever your activity is. The other big important thing is to use yourself as a model. What I mean by that is if you're actually looking at your fingers, for instance, you can actually do the distal phalanx, middle phalanx, and proximal phalanx. And you understand the names of the things have to do with how close they are to pretty much the rest of the body. So proximal will be closer, distal will be farther away. So you can use your body as an example as you use other sports. The one thing I tell people that if you're just learning anatomy, which will help you, is start with the bones and make a list of names that you see over and over again. For instance, I actually will tell you, if you look at things like styloid, you'll see styloid processes all over the body. And so if you look at something that looks like a pen-like projection, it's a styloid. And you actually just now have to know that anything that looks like a projection, a pen-like projection, is a styloid, which makes it a little easier. Once you actually know the bones, you can then move into the muscles. And the reason that's important is because if you know the bones, a lot of times the muscles are named with the bones. For instance, carpi is for wrists. You have one that flexes the wrist, so they're flexor carpi, and it's actually one that comes on the radial side, so they call it flexor carpi radialis, and so radialis for the bone, for instance. And so that's actually what I found is the best way to learn anatomy. There is a reason why, and there's a link to an article I wrote, which is in one of the Okinawan Karate web pages, which talks about why learning katas a certain way helps. And it has all the references that you would need. Now, all those references were not really meant to be used for karate. They were actually just on how the brain works, how the brain functions to learn. And there's a lot of things we actually learn. And this will work with anything you're learning, not just anatomy and physiology. Physiology, by the way, a lot of times if you're learning physiology, it makes more sense to learn the pretty much the cells, the action potential, so you can actually go from there and see how bigger systems work. But all of them have to do with a lot of things. One is, how interested are you in the subject? Now, if, like I said before, if you're actually interested in learning anatomy for a sport you play, or because someone broke their arm and you want to know more about that, or a car accident happened, by using what you know, what you actually enjoy, it makes it easier to learn. So look for something that you have already a vested interest in. When you're actually, look at how you can have a vested interest in anatomy. If you think about it, you're human, so human anatomy and physiology, you already have a vested interest. Sports are a good way to do it. Dance is actually an amazing. Martial arts, I obviously have a view that these are something that are really good to learn anatomy, especially if you take what you do in martial arts or in the sport you do and you relate it to anatomy, how you move, what you're doing. And you can actually take every aspect of a movement to make your anatomy work better. So again, so one of them is have something that you enjoy out of it. Second is with the repetition. Third would be using it as soon as you can. So what I actually usually tell people is if you're learning anatomy, one of the best ways to learn it is to teach it to someone who doesn't. So let's say you have a little kid who wants to know everything. Well, if they ask you about, well, what are you studying? Well, the fingers are really called the phalanxes in anatomy, and you have different parts of the phalanxes. You have the phalanges, the entire, and then you have the proximal, middle, and distal. I don't know why I'm getting stuck with fingers today. And so you can actually start using that to teach other people. The more you actually use it, the better it actually becomes for you. Using anything physical actually also helps you, which is why I tell people when you actually learn anatomy, use yourself as a model. You can actually see how I'm actually keep on telling you certain things are in certain areas in your fingers. I'm not trying to do the Dr. Evil, I'm just trying to point out different things. And so that's actually one of the easiest ways to learn anatomy. Physiology, again, is the action, it's how things work. And so it does make it a little easier. For instance, if you're dealing with muscle contractions, understanding fast muscle contractions versus slow muscle contractions versus stationary, which are called isometric contractions, are going to be helpful when you actually are learning physiology. Sports are actually big on it. EKG, all the different things in clinic actually make it easier to learn anatomy and physiology. By the way, this isn't just anatomy and physiology. This actually also works with microbiology. If you're taking it, pretty much any of the pre-health science courses, biology, find a reason for it to be important, and your brain will actually decide that it is something that you need to learn, and it will make physical connections a lot better. Again, I'm actually putting the article in the description if anyone wants to see all the resources and something that goes a little deeper in how learning occurs. This one is actually, the article is mostly on how learning movements, but it will work on anything. A lot of the references came from other sources. Now, the other one that I'm actually going to address is when you punch, how do you make it so, on a makiwara, how do you make it so the knuckles go in instead of the fingers? Like I said, if you're trying to do the fingers, that's one thing, but if you want to hit with knuckles, there's some things that you do want to do to make sure that they actually work right. And I'm going to use the makiwara to show you what I mean. And one of the things people mention is, oh, well, if you look at my hand, this is actually coming out more, so that's where you're hitting. Well, the way you hit a makiwara really makes it so the hand, how far you can make a fist, how much projection the fingers here, doesn't really matter too much. And I'll show you what I mean in a couple seconds when I move over to my makiwara. So hold on and you'll see me on my makiwara. Hello, so I'm back to my makiwara, and one of the things that I actually want you to notice is the area where I'm actually hitting is roughly where my sternum is. You can see as I stand here, it matches about here. I am going to move the rope down so you can see, because one of the things that happens with the rope is it does tend to have some give. So when you punch, you'll actually notice that it looks like my fist is flat against the makiwara. Now, if I come here, punch, and then push here, you'll notice that my fist does stay straight here. This isn't bent. You don't have this move. If you do have that move, you will bend your wrist. Now, how is it that I'm able to say that I'm only hitting with two knuckles, even though you can see that here it's staying up? And that has to do with the ropes actually having some give. So what I'm going to do is move it down. Now, when I come here, you'll notice that there's actually a little space between my knuckle. You can actually see here, if I do that, between my knuckle and my makiwara. I can actually punch here. I can actually come in here, punch and push, and you'll notice that my wrist stays straight. That little bit of knuckle that you see doesn't make contact with the board. It's actually the hit that you're getting with the knuckle. So it doesn't really matter that your knuckle comes out a little, unless that's what you're trying to do, is just coming in here and hitting with that one knuckle. If you're actually trying to use a fist and using these two, again, if you look here, I'm going a little higher, you can see that you can actually keep relatively a straight punch hitting just with that one knuckle. And that's actually one of the big things. That's why makiwara is important. So just to go back to it, big thing is if you're using the makiwara, you can actually show how, even though you may be a little out here, by angling your fist, you can actually punch straight and practice hitting with those two knuckles. One of the big things to remember is when you're actually hitting something more solid, if you're doing something for, let's say, a self-defense thing, most of you are not going to be hitting something flat, but something with projections. And those would be the targets that you would use to make sure you hit with your knuckles in the right place. I know that there are some people who say, yeah, don't aim, just hit. Well, the truth is, if you just hit, you may not actually make the contact you want. Now, I do want to thank the two people who did ask questions. I always love answering any question I can. It's actually why I love teaching. And I do have some videos that you can actually look here, which goes into all the bones, the muscles, anything in anatomy you want to learn, which is pretty much just a lecture. The best way to learn it, though, would be to get some sort of model or a three-dimensional app, which there's a lot of three-dimensional apps now available on the phone. Some of them are even free, where you can actually study the anatomy that you want to. So you can actually look at the hand, make yourself little cards, and say, okay, well, which is the, again, I'm stuck at the hands, which is the first metacarpal, which is the second, third, fourth, and fifth, and you can go with that. Depending on the level of anatomy you need, will actually depend on how much time and effort you're going to need to go into this. But one of the big things I will say with both anatomy and physiology is with time and patience and desire to actually learn, it can actually be a really fun class which can really be learned relatively quickly. I am, by the way, working on certain projects, hoping that I'll be able to get workbooks that would help people who do want to learn anatomy and physiology to learn it quicker. I hope you enjoy this video and have a nice day. And if you do want to support the channel, just go on Amazon, look for my books, Serious on the Rarest Things, or Off the Rails. And that's probably the best way to support me. And you get a book you could give to someone if you don't like it, or you could, no, whatever you like. Have a nice day. Use it for firewood, right? Have a nice day. What do you think?